Welcome back to Learning with Merit. Today we're going to talk about more stuff with data types. In this case, we're going to talk about changing our data type, which is known as casting. So casting is used to change the type of data. There are several different types that we will deal with. One is implicit casting, which we also call widening casting. This occurs automatically, and it's important to know that. Explicit casting, which we call narrowing casting, must be done manually. We'll see some examples of that. Then we have upcasting, which is implicit casting from a subclass to a parent class. We'll talk a little bit about what that is. And then downcasting is an explicit casting from a parent class to a subclass. So these are our different terms that we're going to run into here. Let's take a look at the first one. So widening casting. Here we have a primitive integer type with the number 9, and then I have declared a double here and then passed an integer to that value, and it ends up being 9.0. This automatically casts to a double because the computer can understand how to widening cast or automatically add a decimal 0 to any integer that we want to be a double. And this will happen quite a bit. If you do math, for example, it will automatically widen cast. If you include a double in the math, you will receive a double as an answer. And so even if everything else is an integer, you will get a double out. And this is going to be important for different cases in which that may be a good thing or a bad thing, and it's good to know. Narrowing casting. This is when we have to do something explicit to tell the computer how we want it to do it. So usually what we will do is we will say the new type in parentheses and then pass the data that we want. So here we have declared a double with a special value, 1.61. You should look up what is that special number. It has to do with math, of course. And you will see that it's very clearly a double. And I want to convert that here to an integer, right? And what we will do is we will put int in parentheses, and we will say, here's the value I want to cast, and it outputs the number 1. But why? That's a really good question. The reason why is because it does something called truncating. So truncating is when you narrowing cast a double value, it is truncated, not rounded. This is extremely important to understand. It is not rounded. And what truncating is it means to cut off the decimal. We literally just cut it off. So if we look at these examples here, we've got 3.14. If I truncate that, it becomes 3. 1.61. If I truncate that, it becomes 1. So these values after the floating point, after what we typically call the decimal, after the floating point are just removed. Okay, so if you cast from a double to an integer, it is just cut off. And this again can be important for how we program because sometimes things get truncated and we need to know that that's occurring. Next we have upcasting. So all Java classes, every single class that we deal with, for example, in our case, we're writing in a file called data types, and it is a class. All Java classes are implicitly subclasses of a class called object. Now, that means that we are a child class or subclass. These are used sort of interchangeably. So a child class or a subclass of the object class. That means that we inherit things just like you inherit things from your parents. We'll talk more about that, of course, when we get to inheritance. But the idea is because every single class is sort of a child of this object class, there are certain things that we can do. For example, it says here a data types object is upcast to an object reference. So what I've done here is my type is object. That's the class. My identifier is parent. And then I said equals new, so I'm creating a new place in memory, and I'm calling this little method right here, we call this method a constructor, and what it's doing is it's building a data types object. Now what happens whenever I do this is it's upcast automatically to this object. And we'll learn more about that later, especially if it doesn't make much sense to you right now. But the idea is this thing can be this thing because it's a child of object. Right? Now, if we go here, We can talk about downcasting. So all Java classes, again, they're object class. They inherit from the object class. So here we have a parent object that we've created. See, we created parent right here, right? And we are going to downcast it to the child type. And the only time you can do that is when you do something like this. So I created a data types object, but upcast it to an object type, right? And now I want to go back and I want to set it back to the child type that it was. So I'm doing data types child, and then to actually downcast it correctly, I have to say I want you to be a data types object, and then I pass in that parent, which is this object right here, to become a data types. If that doesn't make a whole bunch of sense right now, that's okay. I just wanted to show you this to you because it has to do with how we cast things. Later we will talk about, in other videos, we'll talk about how this stuff can be useful and why you might want to do it. But that's it for now. Let's remember that this is all about changing data types and casting. We've got widening, which is implicit. We've got narrowing, which must be done manually. We need to remember that values, when they are narrow casted, truncate, meaning cutting off everything after the floating point, in this case for an integer. When we upcast, we're taking a child class object and making it of the parent's type. And then whenever we downcast, we're taking the parent object and making it of the child type. And of course, upcasting is implicit, and downcasting, you will see, is explicit. Thank you for watching Learning with Merit.